Welcome to our 7th lecture in Programming Logic and Methods. If you've been following these in sequence, you might notice I jumped around a little bit. I got into in Lecture 5 actually, I got into an introductory Android project. Then I jumped to Scrum, and now this lecture is going to pick up where we left off on 5. The reason I did that is I wanted to actually get our hands into an Android project so we could start thinking about what we want to do for our project and see what Android is as soon as we could. Otherwise, I'd be talking about the projects and then talking about Scrum, and it'd feel like about 2 weeks before we actually got started. I also wanted to have some things I could demonstrate on the Scrum board when I demonstrated it. So it all worked out well. Needless to say, the presentation I'm looking at is views.pptx, which is in the collection of presentations under course documents. We're going to explore what views are, and this is only about 10 slides, most of which we've already covered. So we'll go through this relatively quickly and jump to the live example quickly as well. What are views? It is basically what Android calls a widget or a screen component. And views all inherit from a superclass called, I believe that view is a superclass. It might be an interface, but I'm fairly certain it's a superclass. In any case, what we're going to find out in this inheritance hierarchy is that we start with something very general, and then as subclassing works, we're able to add more functionality to it. So a text view is essentially a label. An edit text extends from text view and gives it the capability to also receive entered text. And then we have buttons, which, like a text view, has a label on it, but then it can be clicked. So there is an important inheritance hierarchy where we'll see that everything has certain things in common, but then it has specialties as well. We saw the text view yesterday. Well, for me it was yesterday. For you it might have been a few minutes ago. We saw the text view when we created the longitude label and the latitude label, and then we also made holders for their values as well. We also saw a button. And the button we just added, we have not added a ClickListener for it yet. That's what we're going to do today. This is a little bit tricky, but actually not for us because we've been talking about interfaces all along, and button, when it's clicked, is going to invoke a method on a class that implements an interface. So for a button, what we need to do once we have a reference to the button, we need to set its OnClickListener. Now, OnClickListener is a method, and we pass into this method an object. That object must implement the interface OnClickListener, and that interface provides us with a method OnClick, which the button is actually going to invoke when the button is clicked. Now, the real art here is how do we make the OnClickListener? There are 3 different options: an anonymous inner class, which is a lot less typing but confusing syntax. And then there's an inner class, and then there's a class, which is the easiest to visualize but requires the most typing as well. So I'm going to go to our example from yesterday. Actually, that one's the completed example, so let me go to our example from yesterday. And again, sorry, I will probably keep calling it yesterday, but really it was lecture number 5 for us. So I'm going to go to our example. I'll maximize this a bit so we can see what's going on here. And we realize, there we go, we realized yesterday we were able to get a reference to this button by using its view ID. Okay, and actually let me tell you a little bit about what a view ID is, because I know that's the next slide on our PowerPoint. Well, this doesn't tell us a whole lot, actually, that I was hoping, but needless to say, a view ID is basically a unique identifier for a view that is sitting on an XML layout, and then that view can be accessed in the class that supports that layout. This is one area. If you've done C# programming, this might make more sense than if you've always been a Java programmer. C# has this concept of code behinds. That's basically what our activity is. It's a code behind. And the XML file is the user interface that's sitting on top of that. So by using this set content view, we're associating the XML layout with the class behind it that's going to do its support, its event handling, so on and so forth. Okay, nonetheless, we have this btn save specimen, okay, which we're saving into an attribute of this class. Once we have access to this button as a variable of type button, we can say btn save specimen add on, whoops, thought it was add on ClickListener. Okay, well, this is where I go back to the presentation and double check. Or is it set on ClickListener actually? Now that I think about it, it's set on ClickListeners. Yes, set on ClickListener. Okay, so btn save specimen dot set on ClickListener. Take a look at this. What we have is a method that has a parameter variable. A parameter variable means it's a variable we pass in or a value we pass in. What we're passing in is this OnClickListener type. So I'll go ahead and invoke the method, but I have nothing to pass into it yet. That means I need to make a class of type OnClickListener, or a class that implements OnClickListener. Something interesting. We're going to learn some new things about Java in this class. Up until this point, we always said that everything that we do has to be within the boundary of the class. Well, we actually can add something afterwards. We can create another class after the boundary of the main class, the main public class. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say class save specimen implements view dot on click listener. Hopefully that will work for me. Okay, Control Shift O. I might not need the view. This, by the way, is not how I usually do it. Let me try it this way. Control Shift O. Okay, here we go. This will work. View on ClickListener. There we go. So what I've done now is I've made a class here. I put it within my location finder activity just because I kind of want to keep these things together. They're pretty tightly coupled. So notice that I have a red squiggly. And the red squiggly says that I'm implementing an interface on ClickListener, but I am not defining its methods. Remember how an interface works. An interface is typically a collection of method signatures. Not methods, but method signatures. Okay? An interface is typically a collection of method signatures. Any class that implements that interface must also provide an implementation for the methods in that interface that it's implementing. By doing that, an interface can be a variable type, and then the class that implements it can be the object type. Luckily, Eclipse makes this easy. I can simply click Add Unimplemented Methods, and it will go ahead and throw the method in here. This essentially is the method that will be called when the button is clicked. Okay, this is good enough. I can start putting some things together. Right above my btn save specimen, I'm going to say make an object of the listener type, and I'll say OnClickListener L equals new save specimen. Now take a look at that. Notice that the variable type is the interface, and the object type is my class here that is implementing the interface. Okay. Now I can take that L. Let's call it save listener. Actually, that'll be a little more clear. I can take this object and I can pass it in to the buttons set on ClickListener method, and we'll say, okay, associate this button with the save specimen listener. Okay, and I will save. Okay, now when this button is clicked, the button down here is going to be rendered. I can put up a quick message box, toast, I think I can, dot make text. Actually, this is a little bit hard to do because I'm outside. You know what? Yeah, that's not exactly going to work because I'm outside of my main class, and Yeah, that's not going to work for us. So not to worry, we need to refactor this anyway. What I really want to do is call that save method. So I really just want to say save. Okay, but there's a problem. When I invoke that save method, I get a red line, and the red line will have a message that we're somewhat used to. The method save is undefined for the type save specimen. Once again, it comes down to scope, and it's a little bit tricky to see. What I'm highlighting is the scope of the class location finder. Okay? Notice that this is outside of that scope, and this is trying to call the method save. Method save is a private method within the scope of location finder. So what I need to do is I need to make this an inner class. I can copy this, and believe it or not, I can throw it right in the main class as long as it is not within a method. Actually, well, we'll let it go like this. Now, all of a sudden, everything's in scope and it's going to work. So I choose save, and just for S&Gs, I'm going to set a couple of breakpoints. Let me show you how to set breakpoints in Eclipse. You simply right-click and say toggle breakpoint. And in NetBeans, it would give us a Pepto-Bismol line. In Eclipse, it gives you a little blue light here over in the margin. What's tricky is if there is already something there, it just kind of, they overlap each other and it's hard to tell. In any case, right now, I've set a breakpoint. And I want to go ahead and run this and make sure when I click save that it's actually going to invoke this method. When I click that save button, it's going to invoke that method. If this works, this will be the first time we've been able to link up our XML with the action or the activity behind it that is actually supporting it. So I've saved. I'm going to bring down Eclipse a bit so we can see this. I'm going to go to the debugger and say Summer 12 debugger. That's the one that I'm working on here. So I click this, and of course it'll take just a few moments to bring up the debugger. So I'll go ahead and pause this presentation while that happens. Okay, the Android application has come up, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in description. This is the description. One of the reasons I like actually debugging on my phone is it seems to go a bit quicker than the debugger that's here. Sometimes this can really bog down. Right now it doesn't seem too bad. Description. If all works well, when I click the save button, we should be able to see that we can pull this text out in the activity that's supporting the save button. So I choose save location. Cross your fingers here. Let's hope the debugger fires properly. And looking great. I'm going to move this out of the way. One thing that's goofy about Eclipse compared to NetBeans is that the debugger is what Eclipse calls a different perspective. So it basically rearranges your windows. We'll go ahead and click yes. It's one of the things that frustrated me about Eclipse when I first started using it. And up in the upper left, we have basically the stack trace, which shows us the order in which methods were called. On the right, we have our variables. We can also click on breakpoints and see any breakpoints that we have set. And then if we go down towards the main content, I'll scroll this up so we can focus on this. Then we will see that green indicates the debugger is currently waiting here. Hopefully you've had experience with debuggers before in Computer Programming 1, 2, and 3. If not, you really, really, really need to get used to it because you're really going to need it here. One thing that's confusing. NetBeans uses F8 to execute a line and step over it, and F7 to step into a method. Eclipse uses F5 and F6. Unfortunately, if you use F8, that means terminate the debugger session, and that's just plain annoying. So I'm going to go ahead and hit F5. I need to put my cursor, my focus back there, and hit F5. And we see that's going to go to the save method. Sure enough, here we go. It's going to grab each of the values from each of our fields on the screen, each of our views. These two won't be populated yet because we haven't enabled GPS. This one, str description, will be. So I'll scroll down so we can see in here, and there we go. This is the description, and we're all set. So we see that we're able to link together the XML format file and the action that and the action that works behind it, and then view them in the debugger. I'm going to go ahead and press resume, which will just allow the debugger to keep going. What's confusing now about Eclipse is it leaves us in this debug view. We can go back to our editor by, let me move this over, by clicking down and choosing Java. Okay, that's a bit tricky. Actually, I think we were in Java EE view. Were we in Java EE? Let me see here. While that's going, I'm going to close out my simulator that popped up. Yeah, I think we were in Java EE view. But in any case, that confused me at first. As soon as I would go into debug, it would stay in debug, and that drove me nuts. You just have to know to click that button on the upper right. Alternatively, Control and F8 will allow you to switch perspectives. Okay, so now we see that we have an inner class, and that inner class has an inner method. I'm going to show you another way to do this, which is an anonymous inner class. This class has a name, Save Specimen. I'm going to go ahead and leave that in there because you might want to use it for reference. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment out the set OnClickListener and paste it. And I'm going to show you how to do an inner class. The trick is, this is really goofy syntax, but it saves some typing. I'm going to hit enter. So notice, open parenthesis, close parenthesis. Okay, once again, take this original method call, and what we're going to do is we're going to spread this method call over several different lines. Okay? Method call on one line, method call on several lines. Now, with an anonymous inner class, I just use the word new, and the interface I want it to implement, OnClickListener. Open and close paren, open curly, and whenever we have an open curly, we want to hit enter and get a closed curly. That's a very interesting syntax. Okay? So this is a, believe it or not, an anonymous inner class, or a class without a name. And again, this takes some getting used to. You don't have to do it this way. If you want to do a named inner class like I've done down here, by all means do it. But just so you know, if you see this construction, that's what it means. And it seems very strange because you're saying new and then following it with an interface name. And we can't create objects out of an interface. What happens in the background is the JDK actually makes just a small class that implements this interface, and that's what we're calling. Now, if I haven't confused you yet, I will do my best right now. We get a red line here, and the reason is it notices that we're trying to create an anonymous inner class that implements this OnClickListener, but we have not given it its proper methods that OnClickListener specifies. So we mouse over, and then we click the hint here, Add Unimplemented Methods, and there again is our OnClick method. And from here, guess what? We just call save, and we're all set. What makes this extremely confusing is that this entire blue area is a method call. One method call. Not a method, a method call. Within that method call, we're creating a new object, kind of one that's just inline, one that's in memory. Within within the class from which that object derives, we have a method. So what we're doing, and from within that method, we're calling another method. So we have several layers of nesting here. A method call, a new object from a class within that a method, and within that a method call. Very strange syntax. Again, if you prefer to use the named inner class and do it how we did it a few moments ago, that's perfectly fine with me. To be honest with you, even after doing this for 12 years or so, I would probably do it that way because honestly, I start counting here, open paren, closed paren, semicolon, close curly, close curly, close paren, semicolon. I start to lose track, and honestly, I just happen to know this example, but otherwise, it would probably confuse me and I would have to go look it up, even after doing this for many, many years. So this example I've done several times, so I kind of have it memorized. Otherwise, I really have to pause for a second and go, oh yeah, it's an anonymous inner class. Let's go ahead and I'll set a breakpoint here and I'll save. And oh, by the way, now that we're in here, I can pop up a toast. So I'm going to go to my save method and say toast.makeText. What in the world is a toast? A toast is basically a pop-up. A toast is a a pop-up message like a J option pane. It's Android specific though. Okay, so you can only do this on Android. For context, get application. Is that what we want? Get. Honestly, forget. It might just be. I'm gonna have to look at an example for this. Text. We'll say specimen saved. Now we've broken a rule here. I am going to try and yes, we do just want to pass in this for context, the current object. There we go. I've broken a rule here and I've hard-coded a string. Not to worry, that's going to be temporary because I just want to show you how the save button works. Duration, I'll say toast.length long, and then finally I call show on this. So it's a bit of a goofy syntax, but what I'm doing is basically just showing a message box confirming the operation is complete. If I wanted, I could even print out things. Well, why don't I? I'll say specimen saved plus str description. Okay. And, put a space there. A colon and a space. So we can confirm that we actually saved what we wanted. Now, of course, we haven't saved anything. We've only received some values here by clicking on the button. Okay, I will save. And I'm going to go ahead and bring up the debugger once again so we can watch this happen. And because we know this will take a few moments, I'll pause and restart when the debugger's back up. Okay, and after a few moments, here we go. So description, I'll put this is my new description. A little slow again. And then we'll hit save location and this should render the debugger. Okay, and there we go. I'll go ahead and say change perspective. Okay, notice where we are. The breakpoint has stopped within the method call, within the method call. So the breakpoint stopped there. I can go ahead and choose F5, F6, 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 and again, I will stress, if you never do Android programming in your life, just learning the Eclipse debugger will be very good for you if you do any Java development at all. So down here, this is my new description. There we go, we've successfully received it. I'm going to go ahead and tell the debugger to continue. Meanwhile, I'll keep this window up so we'll be able to see what that toast looks like when the toast is raised. Okay, let me resize a bit. I'm going to do this off screen. I'm going to go ahead and hit play. And what we'll see is we'll see a message will pop up on the screen. There we go. Specimen saved. This is my new description. And there we have it. So, with that being said, let me recap what we were talking about on listener classes. A listener class is a very, very small class with one method that is used to work hand in hand with a button. When a button is clicked, the Android virtual machine, actually the Dalvik virtual machine is what it's called, will go into that class that's registered with the button and will invoke that method on that inner class. We have three options. The anonymous inner class is the quickest and the shortest, but a very goofy syntax. The inner class, which is a class within a class, has a lot of advantages of an anonymous inner class, but it's a little more clear and a little more typing. A separate class is completely possible as well, but we won't have any reference to the internal methods or the internal state of the activity where the button is located. So those are our different options. If it were up to me, I would probably do the middle option, if I were you, which is the one where we have our save specimen class. That one works pretty well for me. So we'll leave it at that. This is presentation 7. That pretty much takes us into our second week. So I'll post these presentations and put up a quiz question suggestions. Thank you.